Hello, everybody. Now, this video is going to be me going through sampling methods, not experimental design, which is what a lot of people actually, for some reason, get it confused with. But what we're looking at today is sampling methods. And what we mean by sampling methods is how participants are actually recruited for research. It obviously goes without saying that studies have participants. And up until this point, I'm willing to bet that you haven't really given much thought about how those participants actually came to be in the study, which is what this piece of video-ness is about. So there are 5 ways that you need to know about how researchers recruit their participants. And we're going to be looking at the different ways of how they do that. Now, before we do that, you kind of need to know a little bit about samples and populations and a little bit about these terms that are going to be thrown around. Now, one way to think about it, there are 3 different populations. There is the general population. Okay, this is everybody in the world. Okay, fine. But when you do a piece of research, you typically have a target population in mind. So we don't do a piece of research to try explain behavior for everybody. We do a piece of research with a target population in mind. And if this is the general population, a target population is basically a much smaller subset of that general population. So for example, students at Barton Peveril. You have a general population, which is everybody in the world. But then let's say I want to do a piece of research and I've got a target population of the 4,800 students that are at Barton Peveril. Now, here's something really important. 4,800 students at Barton Peveril. I can't test all of those. Firstly, not everybody's going to say yes, and everybody has a right to say no to the piece of research. Secondly, 4,800, I don't even have time to count to 4,800, let alone actually test every one of those. So with those 2 things in mind, what we aim to do is we aim to take a representative sample from that target population. They need to be representative in size. They need to be representative in ethnicities and genders and sexes and religious beliefs and so on and so forth. So as it kind of shows you just here, the sample you pull from that target population, you want to be representative. But it's that pulling, it's that creation of a sample that we're actually going to be looking at today. How do you recruit and collect that sample? Now, I think I've just basically described everything here. Target population, Barton Peveril, blah, 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 representative sample. One thing I didn't talk about, and this is why I have it written down, is a consequence of having a representative sample is I can take results from this little gang of people and I can then generalize them out to this gang of people. That's the most important thing. If you do not have a representative sample, you cannot generalize your results to the target population, and that's pretty key to be able to do that. Otherwise, why would we do a piece of research that can only be generalized to our sample? What help does that give to anybody? So these are the 5 ways. So 2 are relatively basic, the top 2, both opportunity and volunteer. The latter 3, random, systematic, and stratified, do tend to be more complex. They all use random mechanisms, and there's a bit more work to be put into all of them. Now, all of them actually require you to give informed consent, right? But how you go about that is very different. So let's have a look at the first one, opportunity sampling. Opportunity sampling is by far the easiest one to do, right? But there's loads of issues with it. So opportunity sampling is also known as convenient sampling, and it's basically you asking the people around them, just going up to people and be like, "Hello, mate. Do you want to take part? Do you want to take part in my research?" Or going into Southampton City Centre or Fareham or Portsmouth or Winchester, walking up to people like this chugger is doing, or charity mugger, and asking people if they would like to take part in research. Now, what's an issue with this? Oh, where to begin? Firstly, it's very labour intensive in the sense of you're going to get a high rejection rate. Secondly, and probably most importantly, to be honest, it's unbelievably biased. You are clearly, consciously or unconsciously, going to approach people who you feel are going to support your piece of research. And therefore, you're being biased to who. It's not random, is it? It's not truly random. And you do need to define this, by the way. And what we mean by true randomness is everybody on that high street has an equal chance of being picked. But if you're going up to people and choosing who you go up to, by the way, you're going to only go up to the attractive people, which on high streets generally there aren't that many. You're only going to go up to the people who look like they're going to support your piece of research. You're only going to go up to people who you feel look as if they would actually say yes to your piece of research. So it isn't a case that everybody on that high street has an equal chance of being picked, because the ugly people who look like they're going to turn you down straight away are not going to get picked. So it's hugely problematic and flawed. It does save the researcher a lot of time, effort, and money if you ignore the fact that it does take a long time to actually get the participants. It's quite proactive, I guess you could say. It's quite proactive. You're getting out there. You're trying to recruit a lot of people in your own time and money. But like I say, it's incredibly biased. And you're going to be unconsciously approaching people who you feel will actually support your original hypothesis. So there are, in my opinion, more weaknesses to strengths for this one. The next one, though, is similar, but probably not as bad. Volunteer sampling. Now, I used volunteer sampling for my dissertation. It's how I collected my participants. I stuck a poster like this up with little things with my number on that you rip off down the bottom. And I basically recruited a lot of people that way. Now, volunteer sampling is also known as self-selection. And it's done mainly through advertisements. Formerly, it used to be done in newspapers. Not really done anymore. It's mostly done through social media now. So getting them to fill out Survey Monkeys or Google Forms, for example. Now, the great thing about volunteer sampling is that it requires people to come to you, not you to go out to the people. It requires people to come to you. So what you can do is you can pin up one of these posters, advertise it, and just let that do the work. Let people come to you. You've got too much to do. Crack on with your to-do list. So it does require a person to come forward. Volunteering, important to note, volunteering does not necessarily mean consent. You still have to tell them what is going on, and then they give you informed consent. But I guess one thing to keep in mind is the type of person who is going to come forward. Now, let me briefly tell you what happened to me when I was 18. I heard a radio, that was a thing that used to play music, that I had a radio advert looking for males aged 18 to 25 who did not have asthma and were generally very healthy to come forward for an experiment. I rang up and found out it was something called flu camp. Now, flu camp is where you are injected with the flu on purpose, and you are injected with you quarantine for 2 weeks, before quarantining was cool, before COVID made it cool. And you basically then got injected with experimental drugs to see if they could actually fix the flu. One question I would want you to consider, and I may ask this in class, is would you put yourself forward for that? Now, most people say no, they wouldn't. Oh, by the way, you got to pay $2,000 for it. You got to pay £2,000 for 2 weeks. That's more than I get paid now, by the way, for well, roughly what I get paid for 4 weeks. Probably shouldn't have told you that. Would you put yourself forward for that? Most people say no. A certain type of person says yes. And this is what we call the volunteer personality. It's someone who is more likely going to put themselves forward for tests. Now, my question to you would be, does this person represent everybody? No, it only represents a certain type of person. Therefore, if we go back to all this, the sample we are recruiting does not accurately represent the target population, because only certain people are putting themselves forward and thus not representing the whole population. So a problem with volunteer sampling is what we'll get to in a second, but a strength, smoothly done, is that it could be arguably less time consuming, because all you do is you put up a poster and it comes forward. Another strength, by the way, is people tend to be quite willing to take part once they have volunteered. So they already have the time. Almost everybody that comes to you probably has the time to take part in the study. Otherwise, they wouldn't have volunteered. So the dropout rate, or rather the attrition rate, tends to be quite small in volunteer sampling, which is fantastic. But as I said, it does actually attract a certain type of person, which does lower the validity of lower the validity of the study as well as the population validity, because you're not getting every single person. Now, and it's incredibly biased, by the way, but yeah, less on that. Now, the next three, and this is quite important to write down. The next three all use random mechanisms. And what we mean by that is everybody in your target population has an equal chance of being picked. So the next three, random, systematic, and stratified, are not biased, but they are not biased in who they are recruiting. And everybody has an equal chance of being picked. So the best way to go about random ones, is that actually you're talking about the hat method here. You're talking about the hat method. Now, what you do is for these next three ones, really important, you have to have the names of everybody in the target population. As in the big target, you kind of have to have a register of some kind of everybody in the target population. So that could be, I don't know, people with schizophrenia in Southampton. You get that from Southampton City Council, for example, or from hospital wards or doctor's surgeries. You kind of look for people with autism in year 4, for example, in the Fareham area. And again, you'll go around the schools and you'll get a list of everybody, and you'll create this big target population. People over 70 who live in Portsmouth, who used to work in the construction sector, for example, right? A really niche target. You have to get everybody there. Then all you do is you have all of their names on separate pieces of paper. You put them into a container of some kind. You pick them out. You approach them to see if they want to take part in your research. And if they do, boom, you've recruited someone. That is the hat method. Now, the reason why this is not biased is because everybody has an equal chance of being picked. And therefore, you are not biasing or prejudicing the sample. So What I would say to do with this, by the way, is this is a very, very, very common question. It comes up in most exams about how would you do this. It's, in my opinion, one of the most common questions that comes up quite a lot. Now, the good thing about this is that there's no researcher bias, right? The researcher is not consciously or unconsciously influencing who is going in the sample. It's totally up to chance, and everybody has an equal chance of being picked. But it's very time consuming. Not only do you have to pick their name out, that doesn't mean they're in the study, by the way. That's really, really crucial. Just because you pick their name out doesn't mean they're in the study. When you've got their name, you then have to go to them and say, do you want to take part in my research? And if they say no, right, Tim Roth, I'm going to go up to that person, for example. So it is actually quite time consuming. Now, systematic is also very, very similar. It's very similar. As before, you still need a full register of everyone you want to recruit. But this time, what you were going to do, you have all the names in the hat, for example. This time, you're going to pick systematically. So instead of picking every one out and going this one, this one, this one, this one, you're going to do it every fifth time. So it's every nth number. Systematic is every nth number. You roll a dice, it comes up with a 3. You then pick every third person and approach those. To be honest with you, it's not particularly different from random, but again, there's no research bias. It is incredibly representative, but it can take quite a while to do. Now, the thing that really irritates me most about sampling methods is people see every nth number, and for some reason, they get it confused with stratified sampling. Systematic is to do something systematically, is to do it consistently and equally, every nth number. Stratified sampling is all to do with stratas, which are subgroups, something completely different. So, stratified sampling is very simple, even though students overcomplicate it. Stratified sampling is about making your sample, right, the small sample, the same proportions as the target population. For example, generally speaking, in psychology, the population is 70% female and 30% male. Therefore, it would not make any sense for me to come up with a sample 50-50, because in that case, the males would be overrepresented and the females would be underrepresented. So my sample in this case has to be proportionately similar to that of the target population, which is 70% and 30%. So say I had, I don't know, I'm looking to recruit 100 people. That would mean that 70 people would have to be female and 30% would have to be, or 30 would be male in this case. So how I would go about that is I would recruit, say, 7 people and then recruit 3 people. Recruit 7 females, then recruit 3 males. Recruit 7 females, then recruit 3 males. So essentially what you're doing is you are finding out what your stratas are, right? That's your subgroups. What are the proportions of your target population? And that's something a researcher will actually try. A researcher will try to find out the stratas of a target population. So, for example, off the top of my head, we talked about people with schizophrenia living in Southampton. One thing I would have to find out is how many of those are males and how many of those are females, because apparently schizophrenia is roughly 2-1 in terms of male to female. The jury's out on it. But if my sample's all female, that sample does not represent the target population. So another example here is Barton Peveril students in March. So if I were to recruit Barton Peveril students in March, 16-year-olds are roughly 35% of the population, 17-year-olds are roughly 50%, whereas 18-year-olds are roughly 15%. So if I'm going to recruit 100 people from Barton Peveril in March, 35 need to be 35-year-olds need to be 35% need to be 16-year-olds, 50% need to be 17-year-olds, and 15% need to be 18-year-olds, for example, for my sample to accurately measure you guys. I said 150 there, so a bit of maths. So these are, that's it pretty much. I'm tired. That's it. These are incredibly common questions. So I do actually have a exam example here. Ignore that question on the right because I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote it. But I would like you please to read through this spec and have a look for what the sampling method is. This one's actually quite easy, to be honest, because it literally does say it. But it's your job to be able to pick it out. So part of your job in the exam is for you to actually, because then they don't usually tell you this easily. Part of your job is to ascertain what sampling method is used. That's it. We've got a lot of experiment research method stuff coming up. So the next, go on to the next video, please, which I imagine will be experimental designs.